In yesterday there was supposed to be another terrorist attack on the Capitol, and now you have the Capitol calling to the Pentagon to have backup, long-term backup, in case there are more attacks that they're not aware of. My opening today, the timing of this was perfect. We had you booked in advance. Was literally about, we got to do something. It can't just be hearings. It can't just be these ceremonial things. It can't be, crying out loud and moving on to the next crises. So you've outlined what happened after the Civil War and weeding out white supremacy. Can you give us a little bit of a brief on how that went down?
Yeah, so you have this period post-war when you have an aggrieved white Southern class, right, that really wants to take what was this fight essentially to keep Black people enslaved forever. And they want to change the narrative to create sort of, this honorable fight that existed, and also to create the idea that the South, the antebellum South, was actually this wonderful sort of idyllic place. And that the real problem was that there was this, overreaching, warmongering North that came in. I mean, it's the ultimate outside agitators story, right? And so that's what we talk about when we talk about the lost cause, is this idea that there was a victimized class of white folks who were, one, victimized by losing their free labor, right? Yeah. And who were then, that was compounded by just, not just the emancipation of Black folks, but the enfranchisement of Black folks, right? Because there's this idea that race is a zero-sum game in this country. And so every gain that Black folks make, even the most modest civil rights gains have to then be viewed as a sucking or loss of power from white folks. And we watch these backlashes throughout history, right? So we saw it post-Reconstruction. I've done a lot of work around Confederate monuments. And so, you have this effort consistently to put up monuments that, again, valorize this fight, right? And that change the narrative, and that turn these dishonorable figures who literally were fighting to keep folks in bondage, that turns them into honorable figures. And even, the most warped aspect of it for me, I think, is that somehow that gets turned into this treasonous fight. It literally was a treasonous fight against the Union, is portrayed as a patriotic fight. Right. And we see the same thing with the Capitol. Right. They called themselves patriots. They were they were acting on white grievance, the idea that things are moving too fast, which is what the white backlash, that is a part of our history. It's a consistent sort of, every time the pendulum swings one way on civil rights for marginalized folks, not just Black folks, but anyone who is not part of the dominant culture. Every time that it swings even slightly in that direction, there is immediately a white backlash that sees itself as victimized, and then uses forms of white terror to demand that power be returned to it. And it's rooted in this fear of loss of status, loss of power. This is just the latest iteration of it.
So after the Confederacy lost, the Confederates lost, how did this come to form? Were there organizations? How did Lincoln must have had some awareness during the time. How did this go down?
Well, obviously, you have Johnson, Lincoln is killed. Johnson comes in, he is a Southerner. He is very much a sympathizer with former Confederates. He essentially sympathizes with the folks who turn their allegiance away from this country. So when you have the field order that then gave Black folks the notorious 40 acres and a mule, that land starts to get distributed and is then re-seized, right? I mean, can you imagine someone giving you a plot of land to work? You have given your allegiance to this country. You have worked daily for no money. You are suddenly emancipated. You were given a plot of land and it is then taken. That land was returned to Confederates. And then we have these groups that sprouted up. I mean, obviously, we have the Klan that was formed by 6 Confederate soldiers in 1866. But we also have things like the United Daughters of the Confederacy, the Sons of Confederate Veterans, the Daughters of the Confederacy and Sons of Confederate Veterans, both formed in the 1890s. And they exist almost solely at their core to propagate this idea of the lost cause. This idea that the South was and had been this idyllic place, and it's only Northern interventionism that ruined that. And that slavery had been a benevolent institution, that it had very many upsides. It's a way of also making Black folks complicit in their own oppression, right? If Black folks were most content when they were enslaved, then it wasn't so bad, right? And also just this idea that there was this fight for states' rights,
Right.
when really there was one right they were fighting for, which was to keep Black folks enslaved. So
was that sort of a spin at the time with these organizations? Did they start to pivot and make it more about states' rights as a cause at that time?
I mean, that's kind of core
through the
to
organizations. I'm saying, like, was it like a
Yeah, I mean, initially, they did both actually start out as groups that were doing kind of necessary work. I mean, the United Daughters of the Confederacy used to take the bodies of soldiers that didn't have money, who died on the battlefield, and they gave them these very modest headstones that their families couldn't afford. We see the shift shortly thereafter as we start to approach the beginning of the 20th century, when they then started to, these kind of grand Confederate monuments that we see. So changing what the war was actually about, despite the fact that we have the declarations for the causes of secession, despite the fact that there's the cornerstone speech from Alexander Stephens, like, we have the words of the folks who were there, right? Confederate leaders. We know why the war was fought. But just to mention how effective that campaign has been. There was a poll in 2015 of Americans, and while 53% of Americans do believe that the central cause of the Civil War was slavery, 41% think it's states' rights.
Oh my God.
This kind of ambiguous fight for what's often called, freedom from tyranny. And you see that language a lot, right, with the kind of folks who were involved with the Capitol riots, the kind of folks that were involved with the Tea Party. They co-opt the language of the oppressed. So they talk a lot about fear of being enslaved, right? Mm-hmm. There's this fear that Joe Biden is a tyrant. And it's, the language really doesn't change. But I think at its core, it's the idea that there is a certain kind of enslavement and a certain kind of oppression that they are not supposed to experience. That is an oppression for other people. And so that kind of victimization is solely theirs when they feel like their rights are being taken.
I mean, these groups were eventually, in their ideas, were co-opted in their rhetoric by the modern day, I mean, much further down, Republican Party. Yeah. I mean, but back then, okay, so I understand what the modern day Republican Party's agenda is, but back then, I mean, there's a point where you lost. What's the end goal? What is it? Like, is it just to feel like they're in power? That's what's confusing to me. I mean, there's clearly funding.
This is an early version of the culture wars.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
The idea is that they were actually on the side of right. That there was something that was very much stolen from them. And really inherent to this kind of ideology is the idea that the country is your birthright. So, any loss of power is therefore stepping on something that is rightfully yours. And that's really central to the Republican platform at this point. And the appeals that they make, I mean, since, we can talk about the Southern strategy, we can talk about every single way that is looked, but it's the same idea, stoking this anger that something is being stolen back from you, not by the people that are in office who have accrued everything and who are endlessly working to accrue more money and power all the time, but by someone who doesn't look like you, or who's, the whole idea that your vote is somehow inherently illegitimate if you are not white or Christian.
Thanks for watching and listening to The Nomiki Show. But remember to click like and subscribe on YouTube, and please share on social media. If you're not already a patron, please join us for as low as $5 a month on patreon.com/The Nomiki Show for early and special content. That investment makes a huge difference. We are not corporate media raking in the dough. It's really you guys that are keeping us going. So please consider being a patron. And to our current patrons, thank you so much. We are incredibly grateful to you. We also now have swag. So check us out on thenomikishow.com to get your mugs, your totes, and your stickers.